again, and welcome back to the series of lectures on British and American literature. I am Dr. Binsnusi Iman, an assistant lecturer at ENSB Algiers, and in this chapter, we're going to learn all about the English poetry. So, the key points that we will address are, first of all, the definition of poetry. Second, the main types of poetry. Third, the elements of poetry, poetic devices, and at last, I will propose the famous English poets. What is poetry? Poetry is when emotion has found its thought, and the thought has found words. It is a very beautiful quotation from Robert Frost, in which he just tells us that poetry is very beautiful, in fact. We can also call poetry as verse. It is a form of literature that uses aesthetic and often rhythmic qualities of language. The main types of poetry are, first of all, the epic, which is a lengthy narrative work of poetry. These long poems typically detail extraordinary feats and adventures of characters from a distant past. It also describes heroic deeds. An example of the epic is, first of all, the Odyssey, which is an ancient Greek epic, was written near the end of the 8th century BC. Homer narrates the story of Odysseus' long journey home after the Trojan War. Then we have another example, which is the Divine Comedy, written in early 14th century by the Italian poet Dante, which is an epic poem trilogy. Its 40,233 lines describe the journey of man through hell, purgatory, and heaven. And at last we have Paradise Lost, which was written in 1667, which is considered as John Milton's major work and the most famous poem in the English language. Another type, which is the sonnet, it is a poem of 14 lines of verse that follow a specific rhyme scheme depending on the type of the sonnet. The word sonnet comes from the Italian word sonetto, meaning little song. Since sonnets follow a strict rhyme scheme, they can definitely sound melodic when read aloud. A very famous sonnet of Shakespeare, which is Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, it keeps with the traditional theme of comparing the beauty of the poet's love interest to the beautiful aspects of nature. I will read these lines for you. Shall I compare thee to a summer day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaves hath all too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance on nature's changing course entrimmed. By the eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal line to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Another type of poetry is limerick, which is a 5-line poem that consists of a single stanza, an AABBA rhyme scheme, and whose subject is a short humorous tale or description. Here an example of a limerick, The Marriage of Poor Kim Kardashian. It's a poem by Sir Salman Rushdie. The marriage of poor Kim Kardashian was crushed like a car in Kardashian. Her Chris cried, not fair, why can't I keep my share? But Kardashian fell clean out of fashion. As you can see, there is the aspect of humor in this poem. Then we have the ode, which is a formal lyric poem that is written in celebration, appreciation, or dedication. They are generally directed at a specific person, place, idea, or object. Unlike other forms of poetry, the ode does not have a strict line or stanza requirement. An example of the ode is John Keats' Ode to a Nightingale, written in 1819. It is dedicated, as the title suggests, to a nightingale, which is a bird. Throughout the poem, Keats touches on themes of life, death, and the fleeting nature of pleasure. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird. No hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the self-same song that found a path to the sad heart of the wrath when sick for home. Another type, which is the ballad, is a type of a poem that tells a story and was traditionally set to music. English language ballads are typically composed of four-line stanzas that follow an ABCB rhyme scheme. Many ballads have a refrain, which is a line or stanza that repeats throughout the poem, much like the chorus of modern-day songs. An example of the ballad is John Keats' La Belle Dame sans Merci, 1819, focuses on the themes of love and death. In the poem, a fairy seduces a knight, then condemns him to an untimely demise. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wide. Now we move to the basic or the main elements of poetry or of a poem. We start with verse. A verse is a collection of metrical lines of poetry. It is used to define the difference of poetry and prose. It contains rhythmic patterns and most of the time rhyme. There are three types of verse in English. So we have rhymed verse, which is the most common type, usually has a metrical form that rhymes throughout. And then we have the blank verse, which is described to have a metrical form but no rhyme. And at last we have the free verse, which has no set meter but may or may not be rhymed. Then the second element is stanza, which is a set amount of lines grouped by rhythmical pattern and meter. It usually has four or more lines and can be referred to as a verse. Stanza has names according to the number of lines: couplet, tercet, quatrain, and sekain. Then we have rhyme, which is created when the last one or more syllables within separated words match. A poem is considered to rhyme when the last words of the lines within the verse share this relationship. After that, we have scheme, which refers to the rhyming pattern within a verse of poetry. The scheme could contain words that rhyme at each of every line throughout the stanza, or alternating lines or in couplets. We often signify the rhyme scheme using an arrangement of letters. Rhythm and meter. Rhythm is the pattern of stresses within a line of verse. All spoken word has a rhythm formed by stressed and unstressed syllables. In poetry, pre-measured patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables are called meters. So we have stressed syllables are long sounding, where the unstressed syllables are short sounding. We can distinguish 5 rhythms in poetry. So we have the first one is an iamb, and then we have trochee, spondee, anapest, and dactyl. To form a line of verse, a poet can use repetitions of feet. So we have monometer 1 foot, diameter 2 feet, trimeter 3 feet, tetrameter 4 feet, pentameter 5 feet, and hexameter 6 feet. We move now to poetic devices. So we start with sensitive devices which are simile, a comparison made with us, like, or than, like in A Red, Red Rose by Robert Burns. Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung. Then we have metaphor, which is a comparison that is made directly, like for example, John Keats' Beauty is Truth, Truth, Beauty, from the Ode on a Grecian urn. It makes a comparison between two non-similar things. Metaphor creates implicit comparisons without the express use of like or as. Metaphor is a means of asserting that two things are identical in comparison rather than just similar. In William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east and Juliet the sun. In this metaphor, Juliet is compared to the sun. The comparison demonstrates the idea that Romeo equates Juliet with the beauty and life-giving force of the sun, as if Juliet and the sun are the same. Then we have personification, which is a figure of speech in which the poet describes an abstraction, a thing, or a non-human form as if it were a person. Like in William Blake's "O Rose, Thou Art Sick" is one example. "Don't death be not proud" is another. Allusion, which is a brief intentional reference to a historical, mythic, or literary person, place, event, or movement, like for example in The Waste Land by T.S. Eliot, which is full of allusions. Hyperbole is the use of over-exaggeration to create emphasis or humor. It is not intended to be taken literally, rather, it is supposed to drive the point home and make the reader understand just how much the writer felt in that moment. Like, for example, The Daffodils by William Wordsworth, 10,000 saw I at glance. He has not counted the shiny flowers. However, as they were large in number, the poet used hyperbole to depict them. Sound devices. We have first of all alliteration, which is the repetition of initial stressed consonant sounds in a series of words within a phrase or verse line. Like for example, tried and true. And then we have consonants, which is the repetition of consonant sounds close to each other within a line in a poem, like for example, gray and pay. We have also the assonance, which is the similarity in sound between two syllables that are close to each other. The repetition of vowel sounds without repeating consonants, sometimes called vowel rhyme, as for example in rolling, spring, mid, din, heavy, weary. And then we have at last onomatopoeia, which is the use of words that imitate sounds or words whose sound is suggestive of its meaning. For example, splash, boom, beep. At last, here we have famous poets in English poetry. We have John Keats, William Blake, William Shakespeare, Lord Byron, John Milton, Geoffrey Chaucer, Kipling, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, John Donne, William Wordsworth, Oscar Wilde, Alexander Pope, Charlotte Bronte, Matthew Arnold, Edmund Spenser, Lawrence, Robert Burns, Anne Bronte, and Philip Sidney, and other that I didn't mention. And we have also American poets like Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost, Edgar Allan Poe, E. E. Cummings, Sylvia Plath, Ezra Pound, William Carlos Williams, Wallace Stevens, Hart Crane, and Marianne Moore, and many others. Thank you so much for your attention, and we will meet again in another video which will talk about fiction.